Zach, can you just turn on?
And I'm going to take this with me when I get up. Okay.
What am I doing wrong here?
I don't think anything. I think it's on.
Hello?
No.
No?
Doesn't make any noise, doesn't amplify, it just records.
You should. Oh, okay. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. I certainly appreciate the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board taking this opportunity to have a special meeting for the Housing Production Plan. We started this process over a year ago, and it's been a learning experience, I think, for all of us. This is our, I think it's about our 5th or 6th visit to an assembled body of one form or another, including 3 public workshops and a survey, much input from the community, and I'm very thankful for MAPC for making this possible. I'm going to introduce Jenny Wright. You all, I think, heard from her before, but she's the Assistant Director of Land Use Planning and Chief Housing Planner for MAPC, and she's been at MAPC since 2007, and her position is for providing housing and planning technical assistance to municipalities, and she's been very helpful to the community, and I'm going to turn it over to Jenny at this point.
All right, great. Thank you, Bill, and thank you, everybody, for your attention tonight. I'm going to run through a presentation. Got to go over here. Green. I'm going to wait for the PowerPoint to come up, but hi, I'm Jenny Wright. And I'm basically going to review for you what we did with the Housing Production Plan, why we're here tonight. And so this is really just a summary. Some of you may have attended the previous forums or meetings even last year, so this will be a refresher in that regard. But we're going to review everything with you and then talk about why we're here tonight. So sort of a quick agenda for the evening. Project overview. I'm going to give you the key findings from the housing needs and demand assessment that we did for Maynard. Talk about the goals and strategies in brief, have a little discussion, and then talk about the next steps. So tonight, we are going to review housing needs and demand. We're going to talk about the goals and the strategies. The idea for this evening with the joint meeting is to get an adoption of the plan so that we can then move it forward to the next step. Some of you have been part of this process since we started here last October, actually. Came for an initial meeting, and then we've been developing the plan over the past year. So basically that's entailed a number of other meetings, 2 forums, big forums in the community. The first one was to review the housing needs and demand assessment that we did and also help us to think about sort of housing opportunities in the community, some of the assets and strengths, and then some of the challenges, and then if there were any opportunities, we looked at those opportunities as a group. We then had a second forum back in July where we looked at July was the public forum. October was when we had at the golf course, we had a meeting to talk about goals and strategies and also to look at potential sites for affordable housing development. In between July and October, actually, we had a site visit here where we looked at different affordable housing properties, we looked at different opportunity areas, and we also had a roundtable with developers of housing in the community, either in the past or currently developers, brokers, and realtors. We also had a survey, as Bill mentioned, and I believe that sort of was the gauge of all of the community input that we had during the plan process, as well as working with the town officials and having meetings with the Planning Board and Board of Selectmen in the past. So a lot of meetings and a lot of process so far. And so we're here, of course, tonight to adopt the plan and then move it forward to the Department of Housing and Community Development for their approval. So just in brief, the Housing Production Plan has 4 parts. The first part is that comprehensive needs assessment, which is basically looking at all of the needs in the community, the existing conditions of housing, and the current and projected housing demand, so demand for different types of housing, single family, multifamily, et cetera. We then looked at the development constraints in the community. These are required components of the plan. So where there might be physical or regulatory or other types of constraints, we looked at that and then talked about what kinds of opportunities the town might have to address those constraints. So whether by the capacity of the town staff, Community Preservation Act funds, and other opportunities, so development constraints and opportunities, the goals, the strategies, and then the sites. So the housing production plan for Maynard is intended to be essentially a policy document that can help to guide new development in the town and also to help you to set numerical goals for housing production, particularly affordable housing, and that's why it's about working towards the state's mandatory 10% of your year-round housing inventory affordable housing target. So a little bit about local housing needs and demand. Generally speaking, what we saw here in Maynard, to some extent, is similar to what we're seeing throughout the metropolitan Boston region, which is the work area that MAPC serves. So that's 101 communities in and around Boston. Our study area actually very broadly is 164 communities, so it goes beyond the MAPC border. And in that larger metropolitan region, we see a lot of similar trends, which is that there's population growing, projected to grow through 2030 and 2040, and that the growth that's happening in terms of its relationship to the demand for new housing units is related to shrinking household size, that there are more households because there are fewer people living in each household. So more people, but more smaller households. So that's very similar to what's happening here in Maynard, which is shown on the screen. Basically, in 2000, you had 4,200 roughly households in the community. By 2030, what we're projected to have is about 4,700 households. The change there, though, between the two, those various decades, is that there were 2.4 people living in an average household back in 2000, compared to what we're projecting for 2030, which is 2.18 people per household. So more smaller households. And additionally, we looked at what is your current supply of housing, which contains, a certain number of single-family homes, a certain number of multifamily housing units, and you obviously have a large supply of single-family housing in the community, but have done quite a bit to advance multifamily housing in the community, but more would need to occur. And so that's what the plan investigated, is by how much. So we looked at the units that might be needed to accommodate the more smaller households by 2030 and determined that there would be a need for 110 single-family housing units and actually 80 multifamily housing units. So some level of increased housing production is needed to meet that level of demand. And a lot of it is in progress, frankly, right now. We also look at, when we talk about housing need, we look at the number of households in the community that have a cost burden. That means that they're paying more than 30% of their gross household income on housing expenses. And there were a number of people in the community, at least 40% of them, who currently have that kind of burden. Some of them are elderly, but not all of them. They're single person households, family households, and just in general, lower income households in the community with that situation. Additionally, 57% of the senior households in Maynard currently are earning less than $40,000 per year. So a lot of people who are not just cost burden, but also technically eligible for subsidized or affordable housing under these terms and definitions. So right now, based upon where you're at in the inventory of achieving housing goals, you've got about 8.3% of your inventory is listed on the subsidized housing inventory, which is basically a tool that the Department of Housing and Community Development uses to measure how communities are meeting their housing goals. And but technically, if you have 369 of your units are subsidized, but you have 1,300-ish eligible households, there's also a bit of a gulf between those two numbers that could be something that gets addressed through this housing plan process. And technically speaking, it also means that right now you need to produce 74 more housing units that are affordable to meet the state's 10% goal. So that's the deed restricted units. So we also looked at development constraints, which was basically, a number of constraints in the community that would probably be pretty familiar to everybody in this room, including limited developable land, limited excess school capacity. There's actually the difference between what's happening here in Maynard compared to other communities throughout the region is that you have increased school demand and increased number of school children, where we see in other communities a lot of decreases in the number of school children, and that is actually projected to be that way. That's not actually the case here in Maynard. And so that means that you have some limited excess school capacity, so a real issue. You also have some infrastructural issues that would need to be addressed in order to accommodate new development. And then as well, some level of additional community awareness building around what we're talking about today, sharing this information with other groups of people, and in general, just some adverse reactions to development, which may be in part related to things that have happened in the past or things that might be currently happening today that need to be remedied in order to move forward. So more housing, both single and multifamily homes, smaller housing for the number of shrinking households that you have in town, housing that's also accessible and affordable to an aging population. So you want people to age and be able to live in this community. So you need to think about that type of housing as well. And then more affordable housing that would be needed to address the number of cost-burdened households currently living in Maynard. So the goals that we devised to address some of these issues are fourfold. The first one, I'm not going to go through this in great detail. It is in the plan handout that you hopefully have in front of you. The first goal is basically preserving and advancing affordable housing. Preserving what you already have. There's 369 units on the inventory. A lot of them are with the Maynard Housing Authority, but not all of them. And they need to be preserved. They need to be protected so that you can maintain that asset for your community. And then you need to continue thinking about where you're going to advance production goals. And we looked at some key areas in town where you're already doing that kind of activity and where you're likely to do more. And that could be working with local developers that you're currently working with, but it could also be through nonprofit organizations and other entities that are well positioned to address affordable housing construction. The companion to creating new housing often has to do with zoning changes, because inevitably, if you were to increase affordability and affordable housing production in certain locations, and we talked about the neighborhood business district, we talked about downtown, some changes might be needed to your zoning in order to accommodate that. We also talked about other zoning issues in your bylaw that relate to fair housing and affirmatively furthering the ability for people to live in town. So third goal relates to programs, basically making programs available to people who are currently income eligible and in need. They range from rental housing programs and assistance to homeownership assistance for people who are first-time home buyers and might need some sort of down payment assistance. And then lastly, we looked at the issue of just the need for community awareness and building support for the things that we're talking about today. And so by way of doing that, it would mean things such as public forums, so more of the things that we've been doing over the past year or so. And then also working with town staff and boards and commission members and others who serve the town on Fair Housing Act and other legal housing requirements to make sure that everybody is up to date on those laws and rules. So we did look at development potential. There were 4 key locations that we talked about, not likely unfamiliar to the people in this room and probably the people who are watching, including Mill and Main and Parker and a number of other locations that we looked at. So areas with potential, didn't look at specific sites and their build out per se, but identified some opportunities because that's, again, required under the plan process. So the next step is to have a formal review and adoption by these 2 boards. Once we're completed with that process, then we submit the plan to the state agency charged with overseeing these plans, the Department of Housing and Community Development. They usually provide a 30-day review, may provide some modifications, but likely not the case. We've done these types of plans for a number of communities throughout the Metro Boston region. And then you have an approved plan. And what that means once you have the approved plan is if you get certification of that plan, that means producing the number of units that you would need annually to meet that goal of 74 units per year. So that is all I had for you tonight. And Karina is listed on here because many of you have met her in the past. She's helped a great deal in producing this document, the analysis, and had been working with a number of you on this process. So thanks to Karina. So any questions? I'm going to go sit down, actually.
Jen, I have a quick clarification.
Yes.
You just said something about 74 units per year.
No, to meet the 74 units needed because currently you have 369 units on your subsidized housing inventory. To meet the 10%, you need 74.
So the plan would be a plan to get those 74 units over
To
time.
get those units over time, yes, to be certified.
Just to clarify, those 74 are based on today's snapshot of the units that we have here. So if
That's
tomorrow
right.
we build a 100-unit, or somebody authorizes a 100-unit facility, our number that we are now 74 actually goes up a bit because the denominator, as Attorney Witten refers to it as, increases. Is that correct?
So the denominator only increases at the decennial census. It does not increase
Doesn't
annually.
By every day, okay, so every 10 years?
Every 10 years, yes. Yeah, it's
We get
an,
credit for adding actual units in between.
yes, you would get credit by if those units are added to your subsidized housing inventory, correct. That's right. But it's based on the decennial census numbers, as in your year-round housing units, sorry, not clear. So,
I have a question for you. You mentioned that the whole topic of cost burdened and people in our community who might be cost burdened and whatever. What goes into the definition of cost burdened? Is it just their mortgage, or is it all expenses associated with running their household?
it's all expenses associated with running your household. So it's actually your housing cost. It could be, other bill payments that relate to housing, but only housing costs. So not your, other food or healthcare bills or anything.
Does it include property
Only housing.
tax?
It would include taxes, yes.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question?
Sure.
One of the things I think I'd like to make clear also is, as we move forward and add units to our subsidized housing inventory, what are the advantages that you see doing it in a sort of prescribed manner that the community, I think you call it a local initiative?
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain a little bit for everybody about a local initiative as opposed to like a 40B
Right.
unfriendly?
Sure.
And the advantages that offers for the community, because that's one of the plans I'd like to lay out in the next year.
Yep, and in the strategies, we talk about utilization of the local initiative program, which is essentially, 40B has kind of two phases to it. They're both through the comprehensive permit, and most people are familiar with that. The comprehensive permit is when a developer goes to your zoning board of appeals and applies for a comprehensive permit for some sort of affordable housing project that doesn't meet your current zoning rules and regulations, and so that's allowed under 40B. The other mechanism to achieving 40B is through a local initiative, which is basically, municipally initiated or municipally supported. So working in concert with a developer, and in a fashion that the community is supportive of. So either by way of relaxing the zoning rules that might be involved in a particular parcel, like density or parking or other minimum setbacks, whatever it might be, or supporting them through funding. So Community Preservation Act funds could be a way of showing some sort of support. So that's deemed as under local initiative supporting the development of affordable housing. It's still technically a comprehensive permit, but it's through the local initiative program. And the units that get counted are still the same as units that would be counted under the more formal comprehensive permit process that people are familiar with. I don't know if that helps, but okay. Two different ways of doing things. One is basically locally initiated and supported. The other way is not traditionally locally supported.
So defining the units, though, in a locally initiated program, would we define like what our criteria is for the units exactly? Like, for example, if we wanted a square footage or bedrooms, things like that, how much?
So with the local initiative program, you have more control, but you could technically have the same dialogue with a developer under 40B, under the more formal process that I outlined previously. But the plan that we have before us tonight, and you have before you, is that it's laying out some criteria of things that you should be thinking about when looking at new development, as in certain needs that you know now exist in the community, certain affordability levels that would be helpful in the community. And that could be something that you put into a local initiative project. So if you have something like that in mind, yes.
And is there assistance that MAPC has for us to determine if, in lieu of, let's say developed our own inclusionary zoning bylaw where somebody comes in to develop a parcel, and then we say, okay, well, 10% must be committed to affordable housing. How do we develop a formula in cases where there's going to be payment in lieu of? Because part of this, as we saw, was establishing and getting an active housing trust.
Right.
I'm not clear on that myself, and I think everybody would appreciate.
Sure. And MAPC, our agency, could help with that sort of implementation strategy, either the creation of inclusionary zoning, we've done that with other communities, and definitely the creation of a municipal affordable housing trust fund and what it would look like. That's actually an action that would have to be by the Board of Selectmen. So one's by the Planning Board, the other's by the Board of Selectmen. And then other activities that were related to zoning in this, we could also be supportive of. The Massachusetts Housing Partnership also provides some assistance for municipal affordable housing trust development and creation. Might be another other resource to you.
Does the creation of a local initiative program insulate the community from a 40B project? In other words, can someone still come in and say, even though we have a local initiative project or proposal or project, however it's referred to, can somebody come in, a developer come in and say, I'm purchasing this property of land and I'm going to develop a 40B project. You guys don't reach your 10% requirement. I can do whatever the heck I want to. Or does this sort of push them aside and say, no, we've got an initiative program that the state recognizes as being valid, and therefore you cannot do that unless you comply with the restrictions that we have? How does that actually work? Or so I'm trying to see, does this benefit the community to have a program, or are we just doing something that somebody can come in and step over anyway?
It's something that you would be working on in concert with other activities. So it's not something that, unless you've created the units, and so the unit count, I'm sorry, I was looking for it earlier, was 22 units that would need to be created annually. That's the 0.5%. 1% is 44 units. That's the way to have that certification of your housing production plan if you create either one of those. If it's 22 units, then you get a 1-year stay. If it's 44 units, then you get a 2-year safe harbor from 40B. If you are just talking about doing a local initiative program, that would not necessarily, or you're investigating it, that wouldn't be enough to not to prevent whatever else you're thinking might happen. So it's not until you actually are creating the actual units.
But this safe harbor thing you just mentioned creates the protection during the interim. It assumes sometime 10 years down the road we hit the target.
That could happen.
Then we're insulated from an outside.
When you hit the 10% goal, then yes, that means that you technically do not have to allow or accept any further comprehensive permits in the community.
But short of that, there's some cover that can be had if we hit this sort of annual.
The annual production target. It's annual or every 2 years, right? So annually it would be 22 units.
Yeah.
2-year stay would be 44 units, which you could hit in a shorter period of time too. Doesn't have to be over 2 years.
The safe harbor numbers that get to 10%, our town council, for those things that we use for those things, John Witten, he's confident that we meet the 10%, but he's also confident the 10% with the combined the housing numbers and the land.
It's not going to meet it now.
Well, no, there's two numbers that go into it, housing and its land, right?
That's
We meet it with
1.5%.
So we meet that combined number of 10%. But the problem is, without this plan, the problem is that communities that have been pressed by developers have more or less all lost. communities that feel as though they have those numbers, it's good for these types of discussions, but the reality is, if you don't have a plan in place and you're not working towards it in earnest, the state decides when someone comes with a 40B whether or not you meet the 10%, and the list of those who have failed to meet the 10% in the state's eyes is far longer than the list of those communities who have succeeded. So that's why this plan is, so important to us. But Jennifer,
Yes.
question is,
Yes.
so we're here, the 7 of us are here, representing the town through the Planning Board and the Board of Selectmen. Exactly in this 72-page document, what is the portion of it that, or is the whole thing the plan?
Is the whole
Like
thing,
what-
I'm sorry, whole thing what?
What portion of this 72 pages is what we have to agree to accept? The entirety of it?
Yes, you have to adopt the whole plan. Can't adopt
Okay,
part
so-
of it.
All right, so can you kind of, walk us through exactly what we're looking at as the plan? Like, we have you gave us the overview and the history, but in this document,
Does it start with goal 1.1 through goals 1 through 4? Those are the 4 areas that we're committing to with this plan? Is that what you're asking, Chris? Like,
You have to adopt the whole plan.
But,
So,
yeah, so-
but the part that you might be most interested in would be on page 61, which is the 62, sorry, which is the implementation strategies. And
Right,
that's
so-
where we talked about the goals and the strategies
okay,
together.
so,
And the
as
people
we-
who are responsible for implementing
As
things.
you go through the plan, there are several different, many spots where there are, definitive action plans and those type of things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do we need to, shouldn't we be walking through those and get into the implementation piece at the end? We're being asked to accept something,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know that I understand it enough, just sitting here now, looking at it without, a little bit further explanation as to exactly what it is we're accepting.
Oh, I'd be glad to. Let's walk through it right now. So the plan includes the executive summary. We talk about the comprehensive housing needs assessment. I reviewed the key findings in my presentation. And the comprehensive housing needs assessment has 3 parts. A review of your demographic information, which is households and population and growth. And then the housing inventory or housing stock. And housing affordability, which is the section that addresses issues of poverty, cost burden, et cetera, which I also outlined in the presentation. The next section that's required in the plan is the development constraints and capacity. We looked at 2 different angles with the constraints. The first part is natural and physical constraints. The second part is regulatory. And then we talk about the side of capacity, which is a review of your existing municipal housing strategies, which includes both planning documents that have already occurred and funding sources that you currently have available related to affordable housing creation, such as the Community Preservation Act. And then the next section that's required in the plan is the affordable housing goals, which also is a summary of the 2 forums that we had and the input that was received, as well as the survey that I mentioned in my presentation, and then outlines the 4 goals with the various strategies underneath each goal to implement them, followed by the required implementation plan, which outlines in greater detail which responsible party need to implement each strategy and in what time frame would we recommend it be prioritized. We recommended that actually in concert with town staff who also reviewed the plan. And in the appendices, there's everything from the required documents from the Department of Housing and Community Development around affirmative fair housing and marketing guidelines to the development constraints and potential, the site identification that I quickly looked at in the PowerPoint. That map is in here. And your current subsidized housing inventory is also listed in this plan. And
Okay.
other maps, zoning, natural development constraints, et cetera.
Is it fair to say, that, like, basically, just for ease of understanding, the first 2 sections are supporting data for the development of the goals?
Absolutely.
And the individual implementation policies. So in the case, if the town were to undertake any of these strategies, supporting data is at hand. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to use each strategy. I mean, these are tools to work towards your goal that are available, and this would be the recommended course of action to do it.
Right.
If we waved a magic wand tomorrow and we reached our number by some other means, so be it, right? So we reached our...
Well, that's one way to look at it. Yes, it would be it's a menu of strategies that are recommended to achieve housing goals. If you achieve the 40B goal, you still have housing needs in your community, which you can choose to address through local initiatives. You have Community Preservation Act funds that could be used and need to be used towards those goals. And you might, if you create the Affordable Housing Trust, that could be another mechanism for achieving local needs. But yes, this is not a prescribing that you must do all of these things. And the plan itself does not mean that you are doing these things, but they are things that you will investigate over time. For example, zoning amendments would have their own process for being adopted separately from this.
So I could see a situation where the town would be evaluating a potential development, and either one of the boards would be looking at the requirement for providing affordable housing, a certain amount of affordable housing with it. When writing up a decision or a town report or whatever the case is, you could rely on the backup data, assuming it's fairly current, and as well as perhaps utilize one of the implementation strategies and whatever was most suitable. So if the town chose to adopt and implement inclusionary zoning bylaw, or whatever the case may be, reduction in square footage, density bonuses, the like, this would be justification for it, essentially.
That's right. Yep. Much like your community development plan was a justification for doing other things in the past, and other plan processes that you've been through have been a way that you then move forward with other initiatives.
Okay, so pages 1 through 61 are the backup. The plan is pages 62 and 63. 63 on is the appendices.
Well, I would say the goals and the strategies would be the key section. I don't think you need to, but you need to adopt the entire plan and its.
No, I understand
that part.
I understand that, but we have to adopt the
understand.
plan in its entirety. But the meat and bones of the plan, what we're expected to do, are what are pages 62 and 63, and there's 21 items under implementation strategies. I mean, unless anybody has any objections, let's just go through those 21 one at a time, because that's what we're really being asked to accept.
Sure. We can, you want to do
I'm not going to
that?
throw out all your data and all your backup, but I want to know that these are the 21 items that we're expected as a
Okay.
town in, planning and selecting boards, that those are the things that we're expected to do going forward to meet the requirements, so.
Yeah, I
But
think-
to Bill's earlier comment, for example, Goal 1, work to preserve and advance housing affordability in the town to reduce the number of local cost burdened households. By adopting this plan, from what I understand, from what I've heard, we're not obligated to utilize strategy 1.1 all the way through 1.8. We can accept through the planning board or the board of selectmen to say, you know what, let's drive through strategy 1.2 as our way to get to that goal. Or maybe we could use a combination of strategies. These are just suggested strategies to get to these. Is that accurate, or?
Well, they're
must we-
suggested, but they're also ones that have been reviewed during a community forum and also reviewed with town staff. So, yes, there's not necessarily an order to things, but actually on the implementation strategies page, there's a recommendation for the time frame within which you would do certain things anyway.
Yep.
So, some things might be prioritized, I guess is what you're asking, and I would concur that you might prioritize one thing over another.
So can we walk through those
Yes.
4 goals in the the subheadings underneath them, and we'll just walk
Sure.
through each one, so everyone understands 1.1, 1.2, on and on, so we all understand exactly what they are, and that will,
Okay.
Let us know.
So the first goal is working to preserve and advance housing affordability in town to reduce the number of local cost-burdened households. The first strategy, 1.1, working towards meeting or exceeding the Commonwealth's 10% goal on the subsidized housing inventory, has to do with the table 15 actually outlines what it would look like with production goals between 2015 to 2020. Of course, 2020 is when the decennial number changes, but we have given for you what we project will happen with your total year-round homes anyway, annually, by 2020. And those are also based a bit on our projections too. So that's summarized in the strategy 1.1. And then we provided you with an action plan that includes things like adopting housing production goals, working with developers to coordinate affordable housing development, annually reviewing the housing production plan goals through the expiration of this plan, which might be 2021, I guess. Regularly measuring and celebrating achievements. So when you actually do produce housing that's affordable and counts, then recognizing that as an accomplishment. So that's strategy 1.1. 1.2 is about producing mixed income housing on vacant and other parcels with potential for development or redevelopment of housing, varying in type and tenure. And we heard, like it says here, a great desire to have affordable housing dispersed throughout the town. That was something that we heard a lot at the first and second forum. So we identified, by way of this, areas that already are in negotiation, which are outlined here: Parker Street, Mill and Main, former Coolidge School, 2 current vacant former church properties. These are not under negotiation, but are being considered. Retail buildings downtown. The action plan here is working with property owners and developers to advance residential development of the above noted properties and others as opportunities arise, and then prioritizing proposals that not only build the supply, but also the diversity of housing in Maynard, to include units that are affordable to households earning at or below 80% of the area median income. 1.3, do you want to?
What does tenure mean in this context?
Oh, tenure means homeownership or rental. It's your tenure. Strategy 1.3, advancing projects under the local initiative program to create housing affordable to low and moderate income households. I think we talked about this. The actions suggested here, and there's also a link to where you can find the application materials on the DHCD website. And the action plan here includes consideration of the former Coolidge School or church property sites for potential local initiative projects, working with DHCD to advance those projects at these and other locations because they're a required partner, and devising a downtown housing program to enable the town to add units to the SHI, like second-story housing. The next strategy, 1.4, is engaging the local real estate community and property owners to increase understanding of and foster development or redevelopment opportunities. As I mentioned, during the process, we had a roundtable which was attended by local residential contractors and developers, as well as brokers and the real estate community. So we would encourage you to continue those conversations. And so by that, we mean compiling and maintaining a list of people, designing a special housing forum, and inviting those people to talk about this plan and other goals that you might have, and exploring additional strategies to engage with them and distribute information, creating a greater dialogue. The next strategy, 1.5, is working collaboratively with nonprofit housing developers and other entities to advance production. And for this one, like I mentioned, some nonprofit developers are specialize in the creation of this type of housing that we're talking about, mostly in this plan. And so there are nonprofit developers who might be willing to work with the town through a local initiative project, like I mentioned, or other opportunities. CPA can be utilized for that in particular. And then 1.6 is streamlining the local permitting process for affordable housing and accompanying affordable housing requirements. We talk about here strategies that range from things that are easy to more complex, like expedited permitting processes, simplified permitting processes, et cetera, creating reference guides. The action plan would be to create materials to communicate the permitting process. That was something that we heard actually at the second forum, was the need for greater communication during that process. Assessing the process and noting areas for improvement, hosting joint meetings of land use permitting boards, determining which other strategies noted above might be more appropriate to implement in Maynard, the ones that I mentioned previously. And then 1.7 is monitoring and preserving affordability restrictions on existing units for as long as possible, which means you have the 369 units. You want to keep them so that they are maintained on your inventory, and there are ways to do that. So we mentioned those ways to do that here, like including working with special state agencies that can help you to preserve longer-term affordability on properties. So compiling more detailed information about your inventory is needed to do this, and working with owners of expiring properties is part of that process. 1.8 is allocating local resources to advance affordable housing production, and for this, we talked about actions that range from flagging projects that are compatible with Maynard Community Development Principles, which are on the wall, which is lovely, and developing and maintaining an inventory of town resources that could be used to support projects like this, and allocating those resources to those projects. Goal 2, then, is about the zoning changes that would be needed to allow for housing choices and flexible approaches to achieve housing affordability. And for this one, there's a number of strategies. First one is about your accessory family dwelling unit bylaw. Analyzing the effectiveness on that bylaw is the first part, which means, is it actually creating accessory dwelling units or not? What are the barriers in town to developing accessory dwelling units? And amending the bylaw to non-relative households. So right now, family is actually not defined correctly in the bylaw compared to the definition of family does not align with across sections of your bylaw. So we recommend creating one common definition of family. Strategy 2.2 is consider additional districts where zoning for mixed-use development may be appropriate, and that means amending Section 9.3 Neighborhood Business Overlay District and or 9.4 Downtown Mixed-Use Overlay Districts to increase the number of residential units allowed. That means perhaps considering allowing larger-scale mixed-use projects in those two districts, investigation of other parts of town where mixed-use development might be appropriate, and updating zoning in those areas if needed, and also developing a companion downtown parking strategy to address any increased residential demand. Strategy, do you want to go?
I just have a question for you.
Okay, sure.
So, like, currently, the town is going to be voting on an amendment to the NBOD.
Yes.
That is making some adjustments to increase the number of residential units and increase the supply of affordable housing. So in this case, I mean, it's a strategy that the town has really utilized already.
Mm-hmm. In part, yes. Yep. But you might investigate the downtown mixed-use overlay district. That's the other one. So strategy 2.3 is the establishment of the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust, which is allowed under Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 55C. And the adoption of that is a formal process where you appoint members, you look at the rules, the bylaws. 2.4 is adopting a town-wide inclusionary zoning bylaw. Let me go back for a second. 2.3, the reason for the trust is to have a fiduciary entity that is specifically designated to maintain and manage affordable housing funds, as opposed to if you receive payments in lieu of housing created, it would go into your general fund and would have to be reappropriated if you do not expend it every year. So the law was created in 2005 to eliminate that problem, basically address the issue of not having to reallocate funding and to put it into a special fund which can be carried and actually gain interest so that it's then actually preserved for the use of affordable housing creation or protection.
Is there a reason why an affordable housing trust fund under Chapter 44 would not be under the control of the housing authority?
It's not in the general law for that to happen. The rule is either, in this case, it's the Board of Selectmen, obviously. In the city, it's a council. It's the chief body that creates it. You can appoint a member who would be a housing authority member, and that would be, allowed, but it's not something that would be maintained by the housing authority.
Okay.
So the next 2.4 is adopting a town-wide inclusionary zoning bylaw. This would be a zoning bylaw that would, and I think you're already in discussions with developers a bit on this, which is to include affordable housing as part of their development. This would make a requirement that it is not a conversation, but a requirement to talk about affordable housing as part of new development. And we don't have in here the specifics of that because that is a next step, is discussing the options and the framework, how you would do that here in Maynard, what would make the most sense. And it would then be, of course, adopted through a town meeting process. 2.5 is providing incentives to include accessible and adaptable housing units in new development. Similarly, looking at how you can leverage the most from private development to get units that are actually handicapped accessible and compliant with Americans with Disabilities Act rules, as well as the Massachusetts Architectural Access Board rules. You should be doing your best to include that kind of unit in new development as much as you possibly can, because you have an aging population and you have a population in the future that could have mobility issues. So something that's very important. And I guess that. 2.6 is assess areas served by existing infrastructure for opportunities to amend zoning to facilitate multifamily housing development. We looked at where you currently can allow multifamily housing development by special permit. So we talked about reviewing applications, looking at particular sites that might be relevant, assessing the infrastructure capacity, and determining new areas that might be suitable for multifamily housing development. The next one is 2.7, amending residential zones to incentivize redevelopment of vacant structures and encourage development of small, affordable single-family homes on substandard vacant or underutilized properties. The actions here are assessing vacant structures, historic properties, identifying areas for redevelopment and infill, and establishing criteria for sites to which an infill development zoning bylaw would apply. And then, of course, drafting it, bringing that to town meeting as well. 2.8 is amending Section 11 definitions of zoning bylaw to comply with affirmatively furthering fair housing regulations. There's a number of definitions in your bylaw right now that are not in compliance with Fair Housing Act rules, so we've pointed out those areas like group home, reasonable accommodations, affordable unit. So that's the end of section goal 2, and I'm going to move on to goal 3 unless you have a question.
I just have one question when we're
Yeah.
into 2. And several of the items in 2, we talked about bylaw changes. Do we have that language that the state is suggesting? I mean,
So the changes we would make would have a local flavor to them. The state's not suggesting we make the changes. The state has certain standards and we may or may not be meeting them. We would rewrite our bylaws to meet the standards we wanted within the state framework.
but we're aware of what they are?
Broad-
Are these the only ones that are referenced in this report, or are there more? There's, for example, there's affordable units should be amended to affordable housing. There's a definition for group home should be added to the bylaw. Are those the only recommendations, or are those just a sampling of the type of things you're asking us to actually make changes to?
Yeah, there's the reasonable accommodation, group home, and affordable unit to be amended to affordable housing. Those are those 3, and then we also talked about family, the definition of family that needs to change. Those are the 4 things that I found in the bylaw.
To be clear, we're talking the
Review.
zoning
With zoning
bylaw.
bylaw. Zoning bylaw, yes, not any other bylaw.
Okay,
Yes, just zoning here.
thank you.
You're welcome. All right, goal 3, addressing unmet housing needs through programming. The programming here is strategy 3.1, maximize existing community resources to enable seniors to continue living in the housing of their choice and provide education about a range of housing options. And for this one, we talked about a range of things, disseminating information about a number of currently available state and other regional programs that could assist local seniors with repairs to their homes, like to make modifications, to remove architectural barriers so that they can have more accessible living units, other emergency repairs, and providing seniors with information on housing alternatives, other places that might be available to them to live. Strategy 3.2 is helping eligible homeowners and homebuyers to access housing assistance. We talk about a number of programs that are available to income-eligible owners, promoting down payment assistance and mortgage programs, leveraging the home modification loan program when applicable, and possibly using Community Preservation Act funds for housing activities. Next strategy is advancing a diversity of housing programs. One thing that came up during this plan process was there are a variety of other types of housing that were talked about, or ideas, like we talked about veterans housing, we talked about other types of group housing, I think co-housing was mentioned. So we simply recommend that establishing a committee, which frankly might be this Municipal Affordable Housing Trust, who would be charged with exploring these needs and the marketability of different types of housing in the community. So that's 3.3, and that's the end of goal 3. So the last goal is 4, and I think for this there's only 2 strategies. Build town awareness of housing demand issues and activities. And the 2 strategies here, the first one is increase resident awareness of unmet housing needs and demand and the meaning of affordable housing, which we had a lot of conversation about at the 2 various times we've been here, actually. We talk a lot about what does affordable housing mean, how does it count, who lives there, how long, what happens when it's not affordable anymore. We've had a lot of different conversations, but not everybody has gotten to be part of those conversations. So we would recommend continuing those dialogues, and that could be through working with community partners. Sometimes there are all kinds of organizations, churches, other organizations, League of Women Voters, a lot of other entities that care a lot about this issue and would be more than willing to partner with the town on such a series of, to build awareness. And then we talk about strategy 4.2, which is the last one, providing affordable and fair housing educational training opportunities to town staff and ensuring compliance with the Fair Housing Act and other legal housing requirements, which could be addressed by disseminating information to all boards, commissions, departments, etc., holding trainings for staff, and ensuring zoning, local housing authority, and other municipal entities are in compliance with these laws. That concludes the goals and strategies. Was that really 21?
That was 21, yep, thank you very much.
All right,
for
you're
going through
welcome.
them all. I appreciate it.
Yes, no problem.
So, I guess we'll open the discussion up to any questions for Jennifer or anybody else.
One comment. First off, I'm very supportive of the plan. I'm very supportive of affordable housing in general, and I've been an advocate for our community to add affordable units to projects as they've come along. I've been disappointed along the way when they haven't been, but that's behind us now. The one concern I have about this plan per se, in my professional life, I'm in the insurance world, and oftentimes when somebody files a lawsuit, they pull out the plan that somebody might have that, what are your guidelines, goals, or whatever. And my concern is we believe here in Maynard, as Chris expressed earlier, that we have achieved at least one portion of the state's requirements for the our 40B safe harbor. Mm-hmm. I believe that we should mention that in the executive summary, that we believe we have reached it, so that somebody can't someday sue the community and then say, you have a plan, don't you? And nowhere in your plan does it say that you believe that you had met that. I've seen it done, even though that's the intent is we fully believe that. But I believe there should be a statement made in the executive summary of our plan that establishes the fact that indeed Maynard does believe and has the evidence to support the fact. But despite that, we are taking action to go forward with an additional plan to give us a safe harbor in a second direction. So I would recommend to the board, to both boards, that we include that, because I think it's protection to the town in the event that there's an unexpected suit filed. But furthermore, it's factual. We actually believe that.
This is the state's plan that they're asking us to adopt. It's not our plan that we're asking. If it was our plan, okay, but it's the state's plan, correct?
No, this is your plan.
But
This is not the state's plan.
Not us.
Well, it's the state rules. Our 40B is the law. If that's, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
40B is a law, a state law, but it's a local plan to meet that law.
So,
Correct.
if, as Selectman Gavin has suggested, is there, that's certainly a possibility, the state that, we could just state in the executive summary that the town believes that it has met its minimum under the 1.5% land area. However, it's opted to go through with this in order to meet community needs or to comply with regulations. Does that certain,
We could
amend at
add
this
that
point?
sentence, but I would not call it insurance against.
I understand that.
I just want to be clear about that.
I understand that.
I'm happy to add a
I'm not saying that that
sentence
would
about
provide
it,
us
though.
absolute protection. What it will do is it answers a question at deposition. When somebody says you have a plan and it's nowhere in there, well, yes, it is.
It's a different way of achieving 40B, so it's not related to this plan, just to be very clear. This plan, so there's to meet the requested, the statutory minima is what it's called. So the statutory minima is 10%. And there are 3 different ways in which a community can work to achieve it. The first one is through the subsidized housing inventory, which is the creation of affordable housing that counts on your inventory. And if you haven't gotten there yet, you create a housing production plan. That's one branch. The second branches relate to the general land area minimum and have a totally different process procedurally under 40B that does not relate to this plan process. I just want to be clear about that.
So then
Adding the statement is fine.
Perhaps
But
if
it's
we,
not
if we
related.
somehow allude to that aspect. What I want to do is to avoid somebody, mixing words or saying that was never our intent to, or we never believed because we pursued this, we never believed that we had met our safe harbor in another direction. That's really my point.
If, tackling from the other side, if we were in compliance with the statutory minimum, we wouldn't be having this discussion.
That's right.
So you can't really put a sentence in that says, we believe we're there, but we're not doing this for just an exercise for fun. This is because we truly, as a town, are not in compliance with the statutory minimum in the broadest sense and in the legal sense. So,
On that one branch, that is true, but on another branch, the way you described it, there's several branches. On one branch we may have, but there's another branch that we may not have.
I'm far more concerned with the possibility, personally, the possibility that someone would challenge our belief that we're under a safe harbor, where we've been told clearly over and over and over and over again that towns and municipalities have not had success challenging that law. Then I am a sentence that we're gonna say, we believe we are, but here's the document that says steps to get there. It kind of contradicts the body of the report and the suggestion that we need to adopt this plan, to write a sentence at the end that says, here's all this information, here's our plan, but we believe we're there.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a comment about this topic, if I may.
You certainly may, Andrew.
So there's 2 issues here. Affordable housing is something that the community has addressed and said it wants to provide more of it. We know from the housing production plan that approximately 30% of the families in town are cost burdened for housing. Getting to a 10% statutory minima does not resolve that cost burden for the community. We shouldn't be looking at this as our goal is to get to 442 affordable units and then we're going to stop supporting affordable housing. So if we truly believe that affordable housing is a community need and a community goal, let's work on this housing production plan, move that forward until there is no more cost burdened, until housing is affordable for all those who choose to live here. That should be the goal we're working towards, not some artificial number that every 10 years gets changed. The argument about the 1.5% acreage versus the 10% has more to do with the town's legal defense against unwanted development. It allows us to say, we've met our statutory minima, therefore you cannot build something under 40B which ignores all of our zoning rules. That's the only value of that, of making that argument for the 1.5% acreage. It gives us some leverage against unwanted development. That's not the case with this housing production plan. It's a totally different topic of discussion. So mixing them together muddies the issue. If we have the legal need to use our 1.5% acreage, we have the ability to do that. In the meantime, let's work towards affordable housing for everyone in the community.
I don't think that I added those terms into the discussion.
Oh, I
You
did.
did not.
No, I don't think that you did either.
I wanted to make clarification about what I was hearing.
I understand what you're saying, but I also understand that throughout the process, through the 5 meetings and the working session at the golf course, that has always been the thrust of the discussion, is affordable.
Absolutely.
And I understand that the overburdened financial situation of some is part of that program. So, but it certainly is, you certainly can't discount the other. You can't discount it because it was, not necessarily the basis for starting the plan, but it certainly has been something that's been hammered home at every opportunity by everyone that spoke before us about this plan. So now, at the last minute, to say, yeah, but that really is not what it's about, that doesn't make sense to me, because that's what it's been about since day one. And I mean, has anybody else
I
heard a
believe
different message?
I believe I'm suggesting the same thing you were, Mr. Chairman, that putting the 1.5% acreage into the plan muddies the water of the point of the plan, because it's a different legal argument about development and has nothing to do with the town supporting the development of affordable housing. It's actually the opposite. It's saying we don't need to develop affordable housing because we've already met our statutory minima. The housing production plan is an attempt to meet or exceed the 10% statutory minima. Bringing in the 1.5% acreage into the discussion is almost, rowing in the opposite direction. I'm suggesting we don't do that. It muddies the water. It's still there if we need to have a legal defense against unwanted development.
Okay.
Is the concern, or let me take a stab at this. If in any way we don't jeopardize our argument for 1.5% by moving forward with the housing production plan, this is not
They're not related, no.
right. So it doesn't undermine it at all.
And that was my concern, that we jeopardize it.
So yeah, I understand.
So the answer was no.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions, comments, concerns?
So I would just say, I'm trying to digest what Andrew just said, so it sounds like if we're talking about just being strategic and being progressive here about housing, what we want to see from housing perspective going forward, versus trying to be reactive and protect the impression that someone may have about what we're trying to actually do or what we feel our position is, your recommendation is let's keep that language out of there because it may invite someone to actually read something into what this project really wasn't about. To me, the project is about advancing the housing cause in the town, right, long term, not just now
Right.
and then the next couple, but it's for the future. It's some of the
It's a comprehensive plan.
the slides that we saw up there went out to
I've seen it.
2030 for crying out loud.
That's right.
So,
And we've been working on it for the better part of a year with the help of MAPC and the community's involvement. I think it's a terrific, broad-based plan. The 1.5% thing is a legal technicality that we would have in our back pocket. The reason it came up was because there was an unwanted development being proposed.
But the goal, is to get away from, just eliminate the 1.5% and get to 10.
Get to 20.
I understand.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that we get to 10 and say, that's it. I mean,
No one is, but my point is that the 1.5% invites that
Right.
speculation that you really don't want to do more than you really have to.
You need to do more than you really have to, especially with the aging community we have.
There you go.
The other situations that are clearly outlined. So the next point, Jennifer, is, are you leaving us after this evening?
Unless you call for my support, yes.
Well, I guess that's the question, so we adopt the program and then are we literally on our own as a community, or is it, or are there follow-through and follow-ups with, your agency to, walk through some of these things and work through some of these things? How does that
I
work?
would highly recommend continuing to work together. I think we've established a great working relationship already, and I've been really impressed by the enthusiasm from both boards and different people who are not here today from the boards, and the staff, and frankly, people who are in this room who are at different meetings. So we would love to continue working with you. And there's actually a district local technical assistance program. We recently, I think probably Kevin, received an email or a letter from Mark Drasen, our executive director, indicating that there's additional funding and support available for communities to continue doing technical assistance work with us. And we could certainly work with you on the zoning recommendations if that's something that you're interested in, or the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust, a couple of other things that are in here too.
No, that's great. I just didn't know the answer to the question of whether or not you guys stay with it going forward. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious, does adoption of this plan commit the town to doing anything?
Great question.
That's a good question, because I think it does. I think it commits you, if you agree to it, it commits you, in a moral sense, you're committing yourself to the plan, to follow through with the plan. I think that we have, obviously you asked the question, so you're aware that we do have certain things here that we don't follow, but I think that, this has been, since I've been, involved, a major issue in every discussion, in every development. So, yeah, I think the town is morally obligated, in so far as the town can be morally obligated, something to follow through with the plan. I don't know that there's a legal ramifications, other than the legal ramifications that exist if we don't meet the numbers that we have to meet per the standard, meet the state standard. I think we're obligated to.
Also, Mr. Chair, if I may, using our community development principles, it certainly expands our tools for number 5, expanding housing opportunities. It's certainly consistent and forwards that.
So, yeah.
I said yes.
No, it's not.
So
You happy
now,
with that?
So, I mean, is that, I don't know, that's the answer. I guess that's my answer. I don't know.
I
if
think
anyone
that's a
else-
good answer.
I don't know if anyone else feels differently, but I think we're, morally obligated to follow through.
Any
Because
lawyers
the-
in the crowd or on board who disagree or would say that we're on the hook for anything?
I raised the question because we have a municipal affordable housing trust enacted several years ago. We have addressed housing production back in the community development plan. So there's, again, a history of, we've taken steps, we've contemplated things, but there has not been any concerted, focused activity to actually move forward, with the exception of the Veterans Housing Study, and I think there was one other kind of thing. So what I'm projecting to you is, if you adopt the plan, and I suggest you should, that there is an imperative to begin to do stuff.
No, there certainly is, and that's, you see that in some of the things that we're dealing with some of the developers now, and I can tell you that, Bill Nemser is, we talk frequently and work frequently with those other documents that are here, long-range planning and those other things that are, and Bill is working to, redefine some of those things and actually modernize them. Some of the plans that we have in place, the data that Bill is looking at and some of the plans that Maynard is using is data from 1999, 2000, that census. So we're using, old data and we're working to, with Bill to, modernize and get some new information. Even the numbers from the one was 2006 was the most recent one. Even from 2006, the difference between 2006 and today is just, the differences are staggering. And, there's no mention in any of these documents about, electronic, the media, the electronic media, and all the things that people use to conduct their daily lives now. And those things, but there's things about communications and different things in those plans. And they don't include computers, they don't include the internet, they don't include, mobile devices. It's our things are so old, but he's, Bill's been working not alone, but, to upgrade those things and bring them in so that they're more, more useful for us today. And this is just another piece to that big puzzle. But this is probably, the amount of time that the three ladies from the state have put into it, and Bill's department and the rest of us. It's a lot of work. So, and it's, you know, a lot of people, yourself included, have been at all the sessions and, you know, taken part in the working session at the golf course. So it's not something that was done without the input of the town. So it's certainly, just given those facts alone, it's the town's obligated, I think, to, you know, react to it and act upon it.
Mr. Chairman, if you wouldn't mind, just a comment I'm thinking as I'm reading through some of these strategies here, especially specifically goal 2. I mean, I'd love to hear from the planning board. I mean, 8 of these things are directly as you as the lead, right? And then the planning department, you know, working in concert with Bill. So, I mean, based on what you heard tonight and what you've been able to witness participating in part of the sessions and the joint session we did at the golf course, for those of you who were there, do you guys feel that you're committing yourself to this as well?
I think, as the chairman said, we feel an obligation to this commitment, not so much a legal obligation, but a moral one, and just kind of that the community's put in so much time and effort into this. We feel it really does represent, I mean, maybe not a broadest section of the community as possible, but certainly a broad enough one. But I think I wanted to go back and touch on a point that was raised earlier, basically about this being an obligation to the town. And I think Bill can speak to this somewhat, but each year we have to recertify this. Am I correct? And that this is recertified every year annually?
Right.
And that there are not so many sticks, so much as carrots behind this. And I guess I don't mind talking freely about this, but this does give Bill and other people in town leverage to acquire other funds through grants by having the HPP adopted. When a town has a housing production plan, then it's possible for Bill to go up to another authority in the state and say, we have an HPP, we want money to, you know, build whatever would be better sidewalks, I don't know, housing, downtown development. So it does give Bill, and again, the rest of the town, some leverage in that going to the state. And so we think that's important. The way I see this is, and I fully endorse this plan, I think it's a good one, and it's been worked out over 14 months, is I see it as a guiding document. You know, we're not obligated, we can adopt one strategy, we can adopt all of them or none of them as we see fit. But I think the findings have been invaluable. I think it brings us up to date on where the town is for our housing as it stands today, and also in the next 15 years where we're gonna go. And I also feel like, I mean, they do flesh it out. It actually is, you know, page 47 up to 61 is each of those strategies fleshed out in detail about how to do it. And I think it does give us, you know, a much, just a broader idea of how we can achieve these goals. I mean, I see a lot of them. My favorite one is actually the strategy 2.4, adopting a townwide inclusionary zoning bylaw, which is as Board of Selectmen, I'd be happy to spearhead it. I think in the last 2 years, as David and I have talked about before about affordable housing privately, is that, you know, it gets kind of tiring every time there's a bigger development coming up, whether it's 15 houses or 150, that we have to hash it out and argue each time with, you know, a developer about it. It should just be kind of, it should be written in law. You know, that's my just personal opinion. I can't speak on behalf of the board. But I think some of the board members at the very beginning of this process, 14 months ago, were a little reserved about adopting this plan, thinking it was more of a top-down thing rather than our own local initiative. And but I think over time, they've come to see it as I have, which is, again, a guiding document that leaves us, we have some very clearly defined goals, 1 through 4, but we also have a lot of leverage and freedom within that to kind of decide how we're going to get to those goals. So with that, I mean, I hope that kind of rambling, but I hadn't written anything down for tonight.
Absolutely.
But I hope that, yeah, I mean, I think I can speak on behalf of the board that, you know, we're pretty enthusiastic about it, and I think it's a good plan. And, you know, it will be revised over time. I mean, in 5 years, we'll have to come back and take another look at it and see, you know, maybe projections were wrong and there's a huge boom because Mill and Maine's such a success. I mean, fingers crossed, right? So we'll see.
Thank you.
Yes.
There's another benefit to adopting the plan, sort of under the banner of institutionalizing process. If you look at all of you are all volunteers, the planning board is volunteers. If you look at the the town's recent history, where Kevin is, I think, our 5th town administrator in the last 12 years. We've been through 3 or 4 town accountants, several DPW superintendents. There's been a high rate of turnover. Having a plan like this, which whoever occupies various seats can come back to, is a valuable document.
I agree.
I would agree with that.
Any other questions? Anybody have any questions, anything? Yeah. So, I guess we have to vote as the planning board and as the board of selectmen individually, and we have motions, make our own.
Yeah, I don't know what the
Yes.
motion,
Each one should make their own motion to adopt the plan. That has to be the language.
Okay.
And you would then, I think, I'm not sure what your procedure is, if it's roll call or not, but you would have to just simply have the vote to adopt.
yeah,
Okay.
it wouldn't have to be a roll call
Okay.
vote.
Are we doing a show of hands as usual?
Yeah. It's on
Okay,
TV.
I guess we'll go first. I make a motion to accept the Maynard Housing Production Plan as presented.
Second?
Second. Any further discussion from anybody?
Language has to be adopt, sorry.
It has to be adopted.
For the
Oh,
minutes
okay.
go to the state with the plan, and it has to be that language.
That's why I asked you.
Yeah. No, I said
It does say
adopt.
draft up there, so we're gonna lock
It's
in the
okay.
draft into a final copy as well.
Yeah, so the fact that it says draft on the top doesn't matter?
No, we'll remove draft, any other last minute things that need to, that may have been caught, we'll make any
Okay.
changes before we send it to the state, yes.
All right, I'll change it. I'll make a motion to adopt the Maynard Housing Production Plan as presented this evening.
Second.
Any further discussion? All of those in favor? Okay, your turn.
All right, I'll make a motion as well to adopt the Maynard Housing Production Plan as presented and written this evening. Motion's been made and seconded. Any more discussion? No? All in favor? That's 3.
Thank you, Jennifer.
You're welcome, thank you.
To Bernie's point, Bernie made a point in his discussion about, how much of the town this really speaks to it. And unfortunately, we go through these things over and over, and it's so difficult. We always have the same 10 or 12 people helping us, and that's the difficulty in getting these things done. And I agree with you 100%. It's just, I wish we had more participation, but I think we did a good job with this one.
Mr. Chair, if I could just, for the record, just a formal thank you to the team, Jenny and Karina, and the Metropolitan Area Planning Council is our, as most of you know, our regional planning council, which these folks represent, and the executive director, and the fact that they have the local technical assistance program is huge, and that we're able to get this work through that partnership is huge for the town of Maine. And so I want to thank you again formally, and the folks back at MAPC.
You're very welcome, and I would love to thank all of you for your support during the process, and all of the comments and the feedback and the discussion, which has been excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Yes,
you.
you're welcome.
Happy holidays.
Motion to
Thank you,
adjourn?
you too.
We're adjourned.